A key target was hit again and is burning in the background. You'll see how the Russians respond in the situation report. June 23, 2026. We are in the 5th year and also on day 121 since the full-scale invasion. Welcome to the situation report. In today's report, we hardly see anything from the front, but instead we'll take a look at the supply situation in southern Ukraine and Crimea, how people are dealing with it, and what exactly is still burning. Russian propaganda is now trying to discredit the images from the gas stations themselves. We've seen them over the past few days. Kilometer-long lines, major problems, especially in Crimea. Here, no gasoline is being sold to businesses or private individuals anymore. A woman stands in front of a gas station and explains that there are absolutely no problems. The reports about the fuel shortage, which now affects almost all of Russia, or at least Western Russia, are just exaggerated scaremongering. After all, you can see for yourself that there are no kilometer-long lines here, and everything is very calm. At first glance, that sounds almost convincing. In fact, you don't see any long lines, no angry drivers, no people waiting with canisters at the pump. But then, if you look in the background at the price sign, you'll see that all types of fuel are listed at 0 rubles. Of course, there's no line because this gas station isn't selling any fuel at all anymore. So the lady wanted to prove that there's no crisis, and for that, she chose this exact spot in front of a closed gas station. And it's closed because the gasoline shortage is so severe that they can't sell anything. That is Russian crisis communication in its purest form. No fuel, no customers, no line, so supposedly no problem either. It's like a nuclear reactor showing extremely high readings right before a meltdown. And then someone claims, look, we're producing 15,000 times more electricity than usual, so there's no problem. But in reality, it's exactly the opposite. When gas stations close or set their prices completely to 0, of course the lines disappear as well. People just drive on to the next station where there might still be some fuel left, and the line simply moves there. And that's exactly what you see here. The Russian authorities and their supporters, especially the supporters, continue to downplay every visible consequence of the fuel crisis. At first, they say there are no shortages at all. Then they admit, yes, there might be some limited supplies now, but these are restricted and don't affect everyone. And suddenly, there's no fuel left for sale at all, and individual gas stations are now being closed across the entire country. And now, a closed station without fuel is being presented as proof that everything is completely normal. If that's the new normal, I don't want to imagine how things will go in the next weeks. This situation hasn't been normal for a while, as anyone waiting in line for long, especially in high heat, will quickly get irritated. So, just like here at the gas station, or rather at the Coral station, 2 or 3 Russians also got into an argument and started their own special operation. It gets interesting when one of them tries to get something out of the trunk, but that's where the video ends. Chinese tank trucks have now appeared in Siberia, apparently delivering gasoline to Russia. That's quite an absurd development. Many pro-Russian voices, and you probably remember this as well, have been saying for years that China would practically unconditionally support Russia in its conflict with the West. The big brother in the East, the bear and the dragon, and the Chinese-Russian friendship, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. In reality, it's exactly the opposite. I and many other bloggers hinted at exactly this scenario a few years ago, or even said it directly, because of course China will not help Russia. After Western sanctions made Russian oil trading more difficult, Moscow had to sell large quantities of crude oil to China at significant discounts, more or less below market value. Now the situation is changing. Russia still sells its oil cheaply to China, but then buys back expensive gasoline and other refined products because its own processing and distribution are under pressure. So China is definitely helping Russia. Yes, that may be true, but not out of friendship, and certainly not for free. Beijing is taking advantage of the situation, buying cheaply and selling back where Russia has urgent needs. For China, this is a very, very good deal. For Russia, the price of its own dependence is exactly what we're seeing here. The supposed strategic partnership is increasingly turning into just a business relationship. Russia supplies cheap raw materials, and China sends back expensive processed products. Crazy world or just good Chinese business strategy? And remember that because I say it every time and I repeat it every time always. If the report is about China, China is not Russia's friend. China, of course, only works for its own interests. And China doesn't care at all whether Russia is down or not. Do you know why the Ukrainians are reporting so many Russian vehicle losses? Take a look. Right now, they're reporting over 600. Of course, that's a pro-Ukrainian source, since it's the Ministry of Defense, and the number has certainly been artificially increased a bit. That can't be ruled out with parties involved in a conflict. When it comes to enemy losses, a study from 2023 showed that the Russians usually report Ukrainian losses as being 4 times higher than they actually are. That means if 10 Ukrainian vehicles were destroyed, the Russians claim it was 40. On the Ukrainian side, losses are usually exaggerated by a factor of 1.25. That means if 10 Russian vehicles were destroyed, they would say it was 12.5 or sometimes just 3.5. So definitely a bit less than what they've stated here, but not really as big a difference as with the Russian figures. Now, of course, you might be asking yourself, hey, Johnny, what's that supposed to mean? Those vehicle losses do make sense, since the Ukrainians are targeting the supply roads. And in the last few days, the losses have always been somewhere between 300 and 400 per day. Yesterday and the day before, you showed us that the Russians are increasingly making sure that convoys are protected by anti-drone air defense teams. That should mean the losses would be much lower. Well, yeah, theoretically, if the intensity stays the same. But what does theory matter if things are just poorly implemented in practice? Here, for example, we see a Ukrainian drone flying toward a vehicle, and instead of protecting the vehicle, the unit just runs away. No wonder the number of destroyed fuel trucks and supply vehicles keeps increasing, despite the drone defense teams that accompany these vehicles. What does the whole situation look like? They accompany the vehicle on the road, but when a drone comes, do they just pull over to the side of the road and run away, or what? Of course, that's not the norm. I'd say this is one of the exceptions. I also saw some videos today where the Russians managed to shoot down drones. Like I said, this doesn't apply to the entire section, but certainly to one vehicle or another. The Kamish-Burunsky thermal power plant is on fire. At the same time, about half of the occupied Crimea is reportedly without electricity due to an alleged accident in the power grid, which was apparently caused by a collision of several Ukrainian drones. The occupation administration promises to restore the supply within 24 hours. I'm very curious to see if that will work, because if a power plant is burning and large parts of the grid fail at the same time, it's not enough to just flip a switch somewhere. Lines have to be checked, damaged sections isolated, and backup capacities connected, and then the grid has to be stabilized step by step afterwards. Maybe it will be possible to reconnect individual cities or critical facilities within a day. I don't doubt that. But restoring full power to half of Crimea within 24 hours sounds more like a soothing statement than a realistic repair plan. That sounds about as realistic as saying you could win the war in Ukraine in 3 days, especially since the peninsula is currently dealing with more than just power outages. Fuel is scarce, important access routes are damaged, and fuel trucks need escorts. And now part of the energy supply has failed as well, which can no longer be generated. Do you remember? I already reported the power problems here in the situation report the day before yesterday, and apparently these issues are still ongoing, and this time on a larger scale. Near the village of Rostolny, the railway bridge over the North Crimean Canal was destroyed. It was attacked once before recently. This is now the second attack. Ukrainian special forces, and according to the Ukrainians, local partisans were involved in the operation. The bridge was one of the most important railway connections used to supply Russian troops in the south and in occupied Crimea. After the first attack, the Russians sent repair crews and heavy equipment to the damaged crossing. Then it was hit again. This time, it didn't just hit the remains of the bridge, but also the temporary structure that the Russians had built. This means that the connection is not only lost, but restoring it will also be much more difficult. Russia now has to bring in new heavy equipment and more soldiers, or reroute transports to other routes. But there aren't many left. Both options take time, and that's exactly what's lacking in logistics, which is already under pressure in several places in Crimea. And with that, I want to thank all subscribers, channel members, and the Algo crew. Special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Renee Kessler and Dietrich Ferdinand Meyerhofer. Subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next Situation Report.